Hello. So we're going to get right into this video. We're talking about the story Bud Not Buddy, an award-winning book by Christopher Paul Curtis. And we're also talking about something that turns out comes up a lot in the story, which is hardship. So you could say part of the theme of this story, Bud Not Buddy, is hardship. And that word is defined as severe suffering or something very hard to tolerate. And so as we get into the story, that is something we're going to see. Things that are hard for Bud to tolerate, for some of the other boys in orphanages, some of the girls as well that are in orphanages, and the severe suffering that children that have no parents sometimes have to endure. And let's look at some examples. We have here an example of a picture showing some hardship. It might not be that obvious, but it looks like these boys have no running water. They probably live in a home like these pictures back here, more like tents or shanties, dirt floors, and no plumbing. So no running water, no faucets they can turn on to get water. So they have to go somewhere in order to get water to drink. And it's not clean water because it comes from a creek bed or a stream. And dirty water can make you very sick, but you can't live without water. No human can survive very long without it. So they are in a hardship situation. This water is possibly also used to bathe in. They use the water that they get from these dirty creek beds or streams to cook, and like I said, to drink, as well as anything else that you would need water for. There's no water deliveries. There's no bottled water. There's no water faucets. There's no running water at all. So that's a hardship, but they look like they're not as bad off as some people. And they're working as a team, so that also might help. Then over here is a little girl with a sign that says she's hungry. Hunger, especially if it lasts long, or if it's extreme, or if it's a small child, especially without nourishment, that's a hardship, as well as homelessness. This man looks like all of his belongings are in the shopping cart, and this man looks like he may also be hungry and thirsty, as well as without a home. So I'm going to read part of chapter 14, and I want you to listen just for a little bit here and notice they're starting off in a situation that doesn't really show hardship, but when I get further into the reading, as well as when you pick up where I left off, you will see examples of hardship, and you should write them down so that you can remember those examples from Bud's life. You've already done an essay to that effect, but you really need to think about the theme of hardship that is woven throughout this story. Okay, so I'm going to start on page 161. If you'll get your book, read along with me. When we got into the restaurant, I could see that it was someone's living room that they'd set about 10 card tables and some folding chairs in. Every table but one was filled, and there were 5 or 6 people standing in the doorway, waiting to sit down. We said, "Excuse us," and walked right past. Then the smell of the place got into my nose, and I could tell why folks were lining up to get in. I closed my eyes and took in a big snort of air. It was like someone took an old pot and poured about 100 gallons of hot apple cider and 100 gallons of hot coffee into it, then stirred 8 or 9 sweet potato pies, crust and all, into that, then let 6 big steamy meatloaves float on top of all that, then threw in a couple of handfuls of smashed potatoes, then boiled the whole thing on high. This must be exactly how heaven smells. So that description, as you probably notice, is an extreme exaggeration. He's really going out of his way to say the smells were awesome. And so all of those details of what it smells like was in that pot. Things you drink, things that you eat, things that have a lot of really good ingredients and spices, all into one pot. And then he says, this must be exactly how heaven smells. That is a hyperbole, extreme exaggeration, but it gives you a chance to picture exactly what it must have smelled like and what was going on in that restaurant that was said to be one of the best. Continue on. I could tell by the smell that Mr. Jimmy was telling the truth when he said this was the best restaurant in Grand Rapids. Shucks, I'd never eaten in one before, but I'd say this was the best restaurant in the world. I opened my eyes because the smell was starting to get me dizzy. On the other side of the room, Herman E. Calloway was sitting at a table with Mr. Jimmy and a woman. Steady Eddie pointed at the only empty table, one that had a sign saying "Reserved NBC" on top of it, and said, "That's where we're at. Over there, bud. NBC stands for Nobody But Calloway." Mr. C changes the name of the band so much that no one can keep up with the new names, so they call us NBC so they don't have to change the sign. Before I could sit down with them, Mr. Jimmy saw us and said, "Here they are," and pointed at me and waved for me to come over to their table. Shucks, I'd rather sit with the band than with Mr. Herman E. Calloway. It could be hard to have a good time eating if you looked up and saw him every time you took a bite. The thug said, "Remember what I said," pointed at the top of his head and acted like he was smacking some kisses. I walked to the other table. Mr. Jimmy said, "Bud, this here's Miss Thomas. She's our vocal stylist." She could tell I didn't know what that meant, so she said, "I'm the singer, honey." I said, "Pleased to meet you, ma'am." She laughed and stuck her hand out for me to shake. There were about 900 diamond rings on just her right hand. Another hyperbole, extreme exaggeration. She didn't have that many diamond rings on her hands. She's only got 5 fingers, just like you. Back to the story. She said, "Oh, a gentleman. I'm pleased to make your acquaintance as well." Then she took all those ringed up fingers and rubbed them across my cheek, held my chin and said, "Come here, child," and pulled my face up close to hers. Uh-oh, I twisted up my face to get ready for a quick kiss, but instead she looked real close at me and said, "What's this, baby?" She rubbed a finger over a couple of sting spots that I'd been scratching. For a second I was going to tell her they were vampire bites, but something told me to tell the truth this time. I said, "That's just some hornet stings, ma'am. I got bit up when the Amoses locked me in their shed." It was her turn to twist her face up. Who locked you up in what shed?" "They were the people the home was paying to look after me. I got bit by their fish head guards." I showed the woman the bite on my hand. I was surprised to see it was puffing up from pus. To the front office. Christopher Robinson, to the front office. You're going home. "My Lord," she said, "Herman, this child's hand is infected. None of you men notice how he looks?" Herman E. Calloway said, "Talk to James. Far as I know, he's the only one who looked at the kid." Mr. Jimmy said, "Well, Grace, to be truthful, I did think the boy's face was a little swole up, but you know how dark it is in the cabin, and by God, there are some folks who naturally have lopsided heads." So his head is being talked about again. And what I would like for you to do is continue reading chapter 14, beginning with "She Said Dark or Not." Once again on page 164. That would be the 4th full paragraph on that page. Continue reading the rest of the chapter. And as I stated, stop and write down any signs of hardship, severe suffering that it either happened in the past or that Bud is experiencing before the end of this chapter. Thank you so much. You are responsible for reading. I just had you read with me, and now you're reading alone, and be ready to discuss the book and answer questions when your teacher asks. Thank you.